We're staying with the worker situation, but this time we're meeting another set of workers, and still a day after the Workers' Day celebration. What are the challenges that the manufacturers have to deal with in the course of trying to provide some kind of service to Nigerians? Some of them include inadequate raw materials for the industry, near non-existent power, inadequate funding, security, poor infrastructure. There are those who argue, though, that the manufacturers themselves are also part of the challenge. Well, I'm not the one that will answer that question. We have in the studio the Director General of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, Mr. Segun Ajayi Kadri. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start from that last statement, or that assumption by some people in some quarters, that the manufacturers in Nigeria are also part of the problem of manufacturing in the country. How do you react to that?
Yeah, it's coming at a surprise to me. I thought I'm the victim of the system. So, I mean, for one to say I'm part of the problem, I'll be looking forward to how they are going to prove that. What is the story behind that that assumption? I mean, because for us, the environment has tended to limit our performance, and the macroeconomic environment in particular has tended to limit our performance, and one will be looking to how it will be resolved rather than assuming that we are part of the problem.
Amongst the challenges that you have listed are inadequate raw materials for the industry. Is it that with how blessed Nigeria is, you can't find any of these raw materials in country? You need to go beyond the shores of Nigeria to get your raw materials? No,
certainly. We source many of our raw materials within the country. But as you are aware, most of those are in the agricultural sector. And you know that sector has been heavily impacted in recent times by the insecurity that we have. We've also had the question of scale. Have we been able to scale the sourcing of those raw materials? Are they available in the desired quantities? And those who are also supplying it, they have to be certain that they will be able to get a market for their raw materials before they embark on it. But we have to import because most of those raw materials that manufacturers use are not locally available, especially those that in the realm of chemicals and pharmaceuticals, active ingredients, as well as sourcing it's not only raw materials, we also source our machines and our spares from outside of the country. But M.A.N, for instance, has what we call resource-based industrialization, which we push our members to source their raw materials locally. But most of those cannot be sourced locally.
Well, power continues to be a very major issue for the manufacturing sector. And I think that if you ask a lot of manufacturers, they will tell you that their biggest headache is sourcing power. Just this morning, the papers reported a story that said that I think for the last 6 months, manufacturers had spent about 76.2 billion naira on alternative sources. And the questions, will now abound as to how it is that we've spent so much on alternative power, yet, our power sector is there looking for funding, looking for ways to provide power to, those who are willing to pay for this power. What exactly is the missing link between the current providers of electricity, as we know it, and, manufacturers who really need this power to be able to get their businesses running?
Well, okay, it's correct to say that power is one of our major headaches. It's been for a very long time. And in terms of our cost structure, it's somewhere between 32 to 40%, depending on how power intensive your manufacturing process is. And what we have seen over the years is the way that the power sector reform has been managed. It has not delivered the kind of power that we want. Most Nigerians are aware of the lack of traction that we have recorded in terms of how it was privatized, and also in terms of the readiness and the expertise and the resources that those who bought were able to bring on board. But for us in the manufacturing sector, there has even been government initiatives that will have ameliorated the challenge. And one of it, which I actually regret to say, is this eligible customer scheme, which will have helped a situation where our major users, those using more than 2 megawatts of electricity, will be able to source power directly from TCN. That will have helped. But for some strange reasons, NEC itself is not actively and intentionally making it happen. We've had situations where difficulties have been placed in the way of manufacturers who are qualified to enjoy that scheme. It was announced by the Minister of Power exercising his powers under the reform, but it's been very, very difficult for our members to assess. And what is even most painful is the fact that even when you don't get power, you still pay. And M.A.N is currently even engaged in legal tussle with the NEC and the DISCOs in terms of the rates they charge way back out of the MITO. We are still yet to resolve the matter, though we are making efforts to resolve it out of court. So for us, I think it is the level of investment that has been done in that sector, is the expertise that is required. So we are looking forward to government actually retracing a step and seeing that particularly in the incoming government, we should be able to crack this challenge, because it has led to being non-competitive, and even the alternative source of energy has become a nightmare to us. So both ways we lose. Yeah, the cost of diesel has not been very kind. I mean, in a sector that has been deregulated, so to speak, and we've seen the climbing costs of diesel. I'm wondering, are manufacturers allowed to import diesel, or do they still have to wait? Because we understand that sector has been totally liberalized. Are manufacturers allowed to bring in their own diesel if they want? Yes, you know, bringing in your diesel at a fair rate, first you are a manufacturer. And then when you delve into the issue of importation of fuel, what quantity will you want to import as a manufacturer that will justify all the hazards that you have to go through? And as a matter of fact, we had explored that possibility before, but it didn't end up being something that you want. Even when you are importing your raw materials and your spares and your machines, you go through a lot of challenges. When you now add that of importing diesel, but many of us are trying to get concessionary rates by making bulk purchases, but then it really holds down your working capital and your funds that will have invested for expansion. I mean, we do not have liberal loan terms. And so it is always very difficult for you, even when you move out of your mainstream activities, to try to improve your businesses. You know, the plethora of things that the manufacturer has to deal with, one will begin to wonder what happens to the issues of coming together and partnerships to ease some of this pressure. What happens when the manufacturer has to deal with all of these things? Now with the liberalization, so to speak, of the power sector, now states can generate their own power. You can do captive power and all of that. Would the Manufacturer Association of Nigeria be looking towards that? If you could just answer this before we get to Lagos, where our colleagues, there's another guest in Lagos who went to the... No, certainly. And already the association actually has a special purpose vehicle called the M.A.N, Manufacturers Power Company Limited, yes, MPDs. And what we try to do is to support power providers. We've been succeeding at it, actually. We have one going on in Lagos, around Ogba area, and we have a situation where we are supporting power providers to reach a cluster of manufacturers. We have been doing that. And now that it has been liberalized, as you said, it's going to give us a lot of opportunity to exploit. Already, we are beginning to speak with some states. We are beginning to direct their attention to the industrial clusters that we have. And it will help to assuage the challenge. But you need to also understand that even though the grants have been given for us to, for states to participate, and which means other players are going to come in, there has to be a readiness. The government has to be intentional about ensuring that no stumbling blocks, no hindrances are put in the ways of those who will naturally come out to take such opportunities, because that was what we had with the eligible customer scheme.
Ayon Buki.
Well, we have with us here Gabriel Idahosa, who is Deputy President, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI. He's also Managing Partner of UHI Professional Services. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Well, it's interesting, the conversation that you have, and I'm pretty sure you have some thoughts as well. But let's begin with the seemingly simple question of, in what ways have government failed the manufacturing sector? And what are those urgent steps, short, medium, long-term steps, that the incoming administration needs to take in order to help the manufacturing sector recover some of its losses, both in terms of jobs and several other things?
Well, as Man has said, the first thing is power. When power was going to be privatized, there are three sections or segments of the industry: generation, transmission, and distribution. For some reason, generation was privatized, distribution was privatized, and transmission, that takes the power from this generator to distributor, was not privatized. And you wonder if there was a good business case for privatizing generation and distribution. And this industry is a single industry. It's the electricity supply industry. And all of them must work at the same pace. And transmission was left in the hands of government. So that was the origin of the result we are getting from the privatization effort. So the two sections that are privatized are moving, they are investing with private sector energy, but the transmission company is still in the hands of government. And if there's a reason for privatizing anything, it is because of the very significant difference in efficiency in managing any organization, particularly commercial organizations, between government and the private sector. So all the efforts to drive the rapid growth of the electricity industry is just held down because you are still dealing with a transmission business that is still run by government. So perhaps the most important thing you want to see is for government to actually privatize transmission. So the entire industry will be speaking to the private sector. So manufacturers can go to the entire industry and say, this is the pace at which we want to work, and everyone will invest on that basis. But now we are investing in generation heavily. We have about 13,000 megawatts generated, but you only get about less than 4,000 distributed, because the transmission capacity is not growing as fast as generation and distribution is growing.
Almost 80 billion naira is what the private sector said that they have spent. Manufacturers have spent on electricity, generating electricity within the past 6 months. And you're saying that if the government should privatize the transmission sector of the electricity distribution chain, it'll seriously help the manufacturing sectors. That's what you're saying. Now, how much do you think the manufacturing sector will save from that activity of government that you're proposing?
Well, first of all, the 80 billion that is being listed, it's just what is recorded. The fact is that it is much more than that. Much more than that. Because power itself is a major industry. The power industry itself is a huge industry by itself. And that industry is not growing because of this disconnect in the center. So we need to, first of all, get the transmission out. And then you begin to see how much we are talking about. It's probably up to twice of that, because there is so much self-generation that is not recorded. the Manufacturer Association can capture this 80 billion from their members and other visible and traceable operators. But you have manufacturers in villages, in all kinds of corners in this. In fact, in the markets, if you go to Balogun or any of these markets, there are manufacturers in that market producing one thing or the other and selling to the traders. So it is perhaps another 50% on top of the 80 that we are talking about.
There have been efforts in the past, Mr. Idahosa, to, how do I put this, stop importation of generators, which many people have said is a major industry on its own. What kind of conversation do you think the incoming administration should be having with them? Because they are also employers of labor, they would say. They also have their investments. They have their stakes in a lot of things. So what kind of conversation would you say that the incoming administration would have with them, so that they also would retain their investments and whatever it is that they need to maintain their own businesses as well?
You see, that's a red herring that we always hear, that generators, the people who import and distribute generators have no power over the policy. They cannot tell government, don't privatize transmission. They cannot. They do not even have what they produce is not even enough to meet the country's needs. So that issue of, it's always said that the importance of generators are, if you look at telecom, nobody stopped the industry from growing once it was properly privatized. So I don't think the generator importer is important in this equation. The important factor is get the industry completely in the hands of the private sector, so that everyone will be investing at the same pace. Generating companies are investing, transmission companies. It has been advocated that Nigeria is too large for one transmission company. You probably need 3 or 4 transmission companies. And then all 3 or 4 of them investing rapidly, and the distribution company investing rapidly. In fact, the distribution companies cannot invest, or it doesn't make sense to expand your distribution company capacity when you are not getting supply from generation. So it means you just build warehouses and no goods coming in from.
I wonder how long that would take us to the level of sufficiency. But let's look at another aspect of the problem, which is, access to raw materials for manufacturers. I know that it's a challenge for most manufacturers because they are not sited where where raw materials are being produced, so that they can offtake, close to in proximity and manufacture. So vis-a-vis the list, of items delisted from accessing forex for importation. Can you begin to look at that and tell us what policies government can put in place to aid manufacturers in accessing raw materials, or if they must import, those items should be delisted from that list, restricted from accessing forex for importation?
Well, first of all, raw materials, whether it's agricultural, whether it's solid minerals, whether it's anything between the two, it's a function of a separate industry. So we're asking ourselves, how much can we support agriculture and processing and logistics from the farm to the factories? Man have just talked about security. In perhaps 30 or maybe all 36, maybe 30 states in this country, agriculture is impacted. Farmers are afraid to go to farm. In fact, for you to run a farm successfully in Nigeria now, you invest in security. The investment in securing your farm is a very large part of your investment. So that is going on. So the manufacturers would love to have the raw materials. They are even ready to pay the logistics to get the products from the farm. But when farmers are afraid to farm, and you have to be a medium or large-scale farmer to afford the logistics and the security, the cost of security, to keep your farms operating. So the decline in production because of security, it's outside the control of manufacturers. It's outside the control of the farmers.
So that leaves, you know, manufacturers at a loss, and then they, you know, inevitably have to access forex for importation. That's a follow-up question, but we must take a break right now. When we return, we'll look extensively at that. Stay with Sunrise Daily. Welcome back. It's the Sunrise Daily on Channels Television, and on this segment we're looking at the manufacturing sector, the challenges in the sector specifically, and you know, we're picking the minds of stakeholders in the sector, particularly with a view to coming up with policy suggestions for the incoming administration to implement, such that, you know, the manufacturing sector can thrive in the coming years. We still have with us Mr. Gabriel Idahusa, who is with us in our Lagos studio. So we're looking at access to raw materials just before the break, and the CBN recently restricted access to forex for the importation of milk, and I know that the LCCI, you know, sort of frowned at that, saying that they were not consulted. We know that Nigeria can achieve self-sufficiency where that is concerned, but there are challenges. So I'd just like you to speak to those challenges and, you know, the justification for the restriction of access to forex for the importation of milk.
Well, the central bank has not given any specific reason. The general position of central bank is that we don't have enough foreign currency, and so we have to prioritize, and then they just pick and choose the items that they don't want to give foreign currency for. In the short term, there's not much anyone can do about it, because the foreign currency is not produced by the central bank.
Yeah.
It is the result of export of products by all other operators in the economy that brings foreign currency. Until we have an international financial center that generates foreign currency by itself. So that's another big issue with our current policies, foreign exchange policy. As we speak, the options are you either wait until you can get foreign currency from the central bank, or you go to the parallel market. And essentially, the central bank is saying that we are not the only suppliers of foreign currency.
But the reasons,
whatever
regardless,
we have is that we will just like decide who we give it to, and if you don't like it, we are sorry. There's nothing we can do about it.
But the reasons, regardless, you know, the CBN will be saving Nigeria billions of naira in the importation of milk, for which we can, you know, achieve self-sufficiency back home if we, you know, concentrated all our energies in that aspect of agriculture.
Yes, that argument goes for every other item that is restricted. The CBN started with 41 items, and then they kept adding a few items. For each item they add, that argument, exactly the same argument, that you are forcing that industry to scale down, be far below their capacity. And so long as you do that, the whole economy growth is restricted. We are struggling to grow beyond 2% GDP just because we don't have enough raw materials, both in manufacturing and even in other sectors that need inputs that are imported. So in the short term, CBN is more or less has exhausted its wits. It cannot give what it doesn't have. So it keeps saying that it is what I have that I will share with everybody, starting with those that are absolutely necessary, that they cannot negotiate. For example, equipment for security purposes, which is top line for the country, to protect everybody else. So they have that priority they are forced to deal with, and then by the time you are, as a manufacturer, an individual manufacturer, as a sector, you are caught very low in that priority. You suffer what we are getting now with the dairy industry.
Okay. Well, let me take a question to Mr. Ajayi Kadri in our Abuja studio. Well, you've clearly been putting out some statements in recent time, especially concerning how things have been doing in your among the manufacturers and how it is doing now. You've compared 2021 and 2022 in particular. What are the things you would say, if you can give us those figures again, if you have them offhand, and what are the likely consequences of doing or not doing certain things as you are proposing now in the year that we are under now and in the nearest future, if certain specific things are not done?
Well, thank you. I believe that you must have been referring to our manufacturers' confidence index, and you might also have been talking about our half-yearly economic review, the one that we just. But we have also been putting out information as to what we expect from the incoming administration. It's basically in an attempt to assess how manufacturing performance has been. You are aware that our contribution to the GDP has remained between 9, 10, and 11%. You've seen that our capacity utilization is around 50 to 53%. You have also seen that the costs that we are incurring in providing alternative energy, you have already brought that out. You have also seen that even the recent Naira crunch has led to a 25% dip in our sales profile. You have seen how the most profitable or the most performing sector is being limited by excise. So all of these have come together to reduce the performance of the manufacturing sector. And what we say is that in order for us to begin to see some progress in that sector of the economy, the government, even though there's an outgoing government, the incoming government in particular, should be able to take direct steps to what I would call stop the bleeding, stop the downward trend in the manufacturing sector, and give life to it. We see, for instance, immediately addressing the issue of this same exercise that I've spoken about. There was a government roadmap that was agreed in year 2022 to last for 2022, 2023, and 2024, where there's an excise escalation. But even before the end of the first year, we have seen an increase by government in violation of that roadmap. This is when they have not even been able to assess the impact in the first less than 1 year, as I've spoken about. And this is against all the data, the information that has been given to government that this will have grave consequences for that thriving economy. And I'm talking about the food and beverage, the excise on wines, alcoholic beverages, and tobacco is ill-advised at this time for us to have that. So if you are talking about what needs to be done, I think the thing to be done is to immediately reverse that increase, because it's out of the agreement that government itself had with the sector, without consultation, without assessing the impact in the first year. Another one that you also look at is to stop the bleeding in the fuel subsidy. I mean, because for us, it is a major impact. We believe that if the funds that can be generated from stopping the payment of subsidy, it will be helpful. Where I believe that the consumption of fuel subsidy of petrol is overstated. We could see that there was immediately
does that mean, just a quick one, Mr. Jaika, my sincere apologies, very, very briefly, because my colleagues in Abuja need to ask you a few questions before we let you go. Is this saying that the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria is for or against the removal of fuel subsidy?
I think we are completely for the removal of fuel subsidy.
Okay.
Because at the end of it, you will see that it is not benefiting the average Nigerian. And as a manufacturer, we see it as incentivizing importation. Because what you are subsidizing is a foreign product. And it is not yielding any benefit for the average consumer. Because if you really look at it, most part of the country are not even have never bought fuel at the subsidized rate. I mean, outside the major cities, you don't really have it. And like I said before, I believe that, and I've read from credible sources, that the quantum of PMS that we are importing and subsidizing, that we say we are importing and subsidizing, is grossly overstated. So I can see an immediate reduction in the volume. And I think we need to move away from the narrative of immediately asking, so what is going to happen? What are the palliatives? I think it is necessary for us to realistically assess what is, what is on ground, and run away from being scared about the possible fallout. In addition to, of course, there has to be palliative, but in addition, we must look at how we can reinvest the funds that we are going to get from the fuel subsidy that we are not paying.
All right, Mr. Kadri, a quick one there, just for purposes of clarification. When you are saying, they should remove excise from wines, spirits, alcohol, are you talking about these products that are imported or exported? I thought that the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria's advocacy should rather be the removal or relaxation of taxes on locally manufactured goods rather than imported goods.
Yes, it's for the locally manufactured products. Okay. I would be happy if you double the ones on excise, double the excise on imported products. It is for those that are manufactured locally that I'm worried about. Okay. And that's what we have advocated.
Okay, let me quickly ask you then, because, manufacturers talk about the challenges, but we do know that before now there's been some attempt at, bridging, the goals that the government would like to see for the manufacturing sector and, where they currently are. One of the things which government came up with, and you also spoke to loans, how loans are not very available. The Bank of Industry is supposed to help in some instances with manufacturers and the challenges that they have with loans. What would you say, how much effect would you say that bank has had on the Manufacturers Association, and what exactly is the gap that is left to be bridged between, some of the demands that manufacturers are making and what government needs to do?
Yes, I think BOI has been quite helpful in terms of giving loans at not so much single digits, because you still need to get it through the commercial banks, and they charge administrative fees. So when you still get it at somewhere below, between 10 to 12%, is still a lot better. But the thing is that the BOI is not liquid enough to be able to meet the needs of all the manufacturers, you would say. And so it has continued to leave a gap that government may need to fill, either by recapitalizing BOI or also expanding those special windows for us to be able to access those loans. Because the average lending rates now is somewhere between 26 to 28%. And for a manufacturer, if you give him any facility that is more than a single digit, you are not being helpful.
How much are you currently, manufacturers currently accessing it from the Bank of Industry?
Somewhere between 9%, 8-9%. But when it does get to the commercial banks and you need to now access it, they charge fees that puts it between 11 to 12%. I mean, that's the best you can have anyway.
Okay.
Can I? Okay, just one of the things that of concern to many Nigerians is job creation, unemployment, and all that the numbers continue to increase, so to speak. How much of that is Manufacturers Association helping to cut down? For instance, how many jobs have been lost in the last 1 year?
Well, quite a lot. I think what we are supposed to do is we are supposed to be a veritable avenue for generating employment. But rather than increasing our employment portfolio, the fact of the matter is that we are having to lay off workers.
Leo.
Yes, to lay off workers. Many industries, for instance, in the Northeast, in the last 8 years, we have lost 60% of our members to insecurity. Northeast, I mean around Plateau, Bauchi, Gombe, and all those areas. You cannot expect any growth in terms of manufacturing employment in those sectors. And what the recent Naira crunch, for instance, had led to a reduction in the number of shifts that you run. You cannot retain people if you are not able to produce. And if you produce and you are not able to sell, you have to cut back. Otherwise, you will be investing on procuring warehouses to be able to store your goods. And don't forget that we also have the shelf life of what we produce. So it has not been an upward movement. It has actually been a downward movement.
I'll come back to this matter as regards, so that we'll talk about wages, minimum wages against what the manufacturers are paying, so to speak. But let's get to Mr. Idahosa. Mr. Idahosa, your organization looks at policy and how it affects the industry and the economy generally. But let's look at that, the unemployment matter and how the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria are working in that space. We've heard Mr. Kadri tell us that in the last 1 year, they've lost 60% of their members in the Northeast to insecurity. That also speaks to the fact that unemployment in that area would have gone up. But across the country, in terms of jobs and layoffs, so to speak, how do you think government policy has worked, and what should the incoming administration be looking to do in that area?
Well, government policies affect all the sectors, so from manufacturing to logistics to distribution to retailing, every sector is affected by these same policies. And once these policies work or don't work, it directly affects unemployment and employment. So just as the manufacturers are laying off, retailers are laying off, a couple of shopping malls either closed down for long periods of time and are resuming. A lot of retailers had to lay off as well, and even their support facilities, transporters. So when we have the national figure of about 33–34% unemployment, it's the aggregation of all the job losses and lack of employment across all sectors. So the policies that make the economy work generally have been articulated again and again. We talk about power, we talk about the general bureaucracy that we just describe as ease of doing business in every arm of government, not just the federal government, states and local governments, the sheer multiplicity of taxes that you lose count of taxes. Anytime you count them, in another 2 months, you have many more taxes. So there are all these general policies around what makes business run profitably, from power to infrastructure to the little matters of addressing certain things within the power of government. If government can just improve the implementation of existing rules, then you could see some improvement. But where in every government institution you struggle, you keep struggling to get government officials to understand that it is an economy that is running efficiently, that makes profits, pays taxes, and puts more revenue in the hands of government. So it's a broad section of federal, state, and local governments looking at all business-facing policies and finding ways to improve them based on consistent advocacy that all of us in the organized private sector continue to make. And that's why we have the Presidential Enabling Business Council, which was to aggregate all these policies. But we find that they have done some work, but there's still a lot of work to do in addressing the whole atmosphere of ease of doing business. I guess that will be our first priority as private sector, to engage government and to say, look at the whole picture, look at the landscape, and you see all the things we have said. are working against business. What can you do when you settle down? We obviously will engage the government once it's settled down, the incoming government.
Well, indeed, a lot to do, and it would look like the manpower to do it is disappearing by the day. I'm just wondering whether you're also placing into consideration the growing trend of globalization and how it's affecting middle to low-income countries where, members of the workforce are leaving for greener pastures. Is this something that concerns you?
Well, it's so prevalent now and so pervasive that it's generally the local and international economies are looking at it and saying, how do you deal with it? These are individual decisions. Individuals saying, I have an opportunity to go out and I need to go out. You can't force anybody to stay where he feels he's not getting a good deal. So what generally we think in the business community is that first is to see what you can do in the interim to keep people in the country. Second is to see how rapidly you produce more people with those skills so you can afford to export some of them. Those are the two things that we need to do, both as business and in cooperation with government. There are countries, for example, like Cuba, that simply export doctors. It's part of their economy. They produce far more doctors than they need, and it's a business for Cuba to export doctors. So it's a matter of getting to understand that individual behavior is determined by their economic interest. So if people want to go, let's deal with that and ensure that we produce more people with the skills, enough to have for our economy and to supply the world economy.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Idahosa. Thank you. Indeed, Nigeria needs to look at how to export some of its resources, areas of comparative advantage. I mean, we could begin to export, like Cuba, human resources to other countries. We can also begin to export some of the things that you and your colleagues are manufacturing. Thank you so much. We're speaking to Mr. Segun Ajayi Kadri, Director General of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. That matter about wages, we'll bring you back to look at the wages as against the minimum wage, national minimum wage. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And here, Lagos.
Well, yes, we want to thank you also, Mr. Gabriel Idahosa, Deputy President, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI, Managing Partner, UHI Professional Services. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Truly appreciate it. Well, your own contribution to the program this morning is also part of our program. Let's take this first one from Kenneth, who sent us an email and says, manufacturing in Nigeria is beset with quite a few challenges. Among them is power supply. Most firms rely on emergency power generators to run seamless operations, eventually adding to costs. The country's physical infrastructural deficiencies are also a major constraint. Difficult access to credit, the cost of imported raw materials, and skilled labor being the additional challenges.
Well, this one is from Henry O'Keefe. And he says the few patriotic medical doctors that have not embraced the Japa syndrome should be properly and adequately remunerated by the government. It is more dignifying and in the interest of Nigerians to enhance the working conditions of our medical personnel that legislate to restrain their exodus.
The Nigerian public health sector is run as a social service and not as a commercial concern. Until universal health insurance kicks in, government is obligated to fill in the fund. Fill in the fund. I don't think government is finding it funny, but hey, this is where we wrap it up this beautiful Tuesday morning. Thank you so much for watching and sending your contributions. I'm Maokwe Ogunyusi.
And I'm Neo Taigwe. In basic economics, we understand there are resources for production, factors of production. One of them is human resources. Let's ensure that the workers serving and growing are provided for so that they can do their best. Thank you for watching.
Yeah, and speaking of exporting human resource, certainly not our doctors. We've exported enough of that. Thank you for watching this morning. I am Bukola Koka.
And I'm Ayo Makinde. Can we make Nigeria come first? Have a lovely day.